Okay, so you've made it through Unit 1 already. Great job. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the community chat. And if not, then let's move ahead. So this is just the intro to Unit 2, and I want to give you a quick overview of what to expect. We're going to be covering 9 different modules, and in each module, we're going to be covering a different element of Italian grammar. Okay, so let's get started. 9 fundamental elements of Italian grammar. Now, depending on who you ask, some instructors say there's more than 9, up to even 15. Some say there's less, even as few as 6 or 7. So what I've come to believe is that there's about 9, and that's just what I think is the most helpful way of organizing the different elements of grammar that you're really going to want to know as a beginner. Okay, I mean, obviously there's way more to learn as you progress, but we're just sticking to the basics. So I've created a little pyramid so that you can see how far you've come and how far you still have to go. So we've already covered the overview of Italian language in Unit 1. Next up is subject pronouns. And then we have verbs, articles, meaning indefinite and definite articles like the, on, things like that. And then we have nouns, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions and connectors, and finally object pronouns, both direct and indirect. Okay, so don't worry if you have no idea what any of these are at this moment. I do go over everything from the very beginning so that there's no confusion. Okay, so don't worry. We're gonna have you covered here. And just so that you are starting to get familiar with the Italian terms for what you're learning, I've also created the pyramid in Italian. So we have 9 elementi fondamentali della grammatica italiana. So the first one, we have the overview is, panoramica della lingua italiana. And then we have pronomi personali soggetto, verbi, articoli, sostantivi, aggettivi, avverbi, preposizioni, congiunzioni e connettori, e finalmente pronomi oggetto diretti e indiretti. Okay, so on we go. Okay, so we're on to module 2.1, subject pronouns, or pronomi personali soggetto. Okay, and here's where we're at on the pyramid. I'm just going to show you at the beginning of each module how far you've come on the pyramid. So right now we're at the bottom pretty much. Okay, but don't worry. You will, before you know it, you'll be all the way at the top. Okay, pronouns. What is a pronoun? A pronoun, or un pronome, is a word that takes the place of a noun or phrase. How many kinds of pronouns are there in Italian? There are many different categories of pronouns in Italian, and some pronouns can be used in a lot of different ways. This course will cover only the most essential ones so as not to be overly confusing. Then you can add more as you progress. Okay, so the point of this course is to introduce you to everything and make sure that you have a good understanding of the fundamentals. And I'm gonna try my best to not overwhelm you with too many details that you just don't need to know at the beginning. So which pronouns will we be covering in this course? We'll be covering the following: subject pronouns, aka personal pronouns, reflexive pronouns, which will be covered along with reflexive verbs, and finally object pronouns. So we have the direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. Okay, so if you don't know what these are yet, we will be going over them throughout the course. Okay. Subject pronouns in English. What is a subject pronoun or a personal pronoun? A subject pronoun or un pronome personale soggetto is the who part of a sentence, the person or thing doing the action. Subject pronouns take the place of nouns and proper nouns. Okay, so for example, if the noun or the person in this case is Lucy, the pronoun would be she. So she is going to be replacing Lucy in the sentence. So for example, I run home. What's the subject pronoun? I. You have a book. Subject pronoun? You. And he is a boy. Subject pronoun is he because he's doing the action. Okay. How are subject pronouns categorized? So we can refer to the subject or speaker in terms of 3 different levels. We have the first, second, and third. And we have 2 categories, singular and plural. So in the singular, we have first person, which is the from the perspective of the first person point of view, which is the I. I do this or I do that. Second person point of view is you. And third person is he, she, or it. In the plural, first person would be we, okay, because we is the plural of I and somebody else. Second person, we have you. In this case, it's plural because in English, there is nothing to distinguish between singular and plural when you say you, or sometimes I guess in the South, you would say y'all. So second person, singular is you and plural is you. And then third person would be they. Okay, that's the plural of he, she, or it. And note that there is no it or neuter form in Italian. Okay, everything is masculine or feminine. So not like in English or in German where we have those neuter nouns. Everything is either masculine or feminine. Okay, subject pronouns in Italian. What are the subject pronouns in Italian? So we just covered first, second, and third person. So in the singular, we have io. Io means I. Tu means you in the informal. Lui means he. Lei means she. And we also have lei meaning you in the formal singular. Okay, so I will talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but there's some ways to tell if you're talking about lei versus lei, but when you're speaking, they are pronounced exactly the same. In the plural, we have noi, meaning we, voi, meaning you, all, you plural, loro, meaning they, and we also have loro in the formal plural. Okay, you could tell because it's capitalized, just like over here. Okay, but voi is usually used instead of loro in everyday speaking. So you're not really going to be using loro unless you're in the formal, unless you're studying this for business purposes or, in like university or something like that, where you have to write a lot of formal language. Okay, so in everyday language, you're basically going to be using voi for the plural you. Subject pronoun helpful tips. Okay, so I have a few helpful tips here. The first one is, although I is always capitalized in English, io is not capitalized in Italian unless it's the first word of a sentence, just like in English. For example, I have a book. Io ho un libro. So in this case, io is capitalized because it is the first letter of the sentence. You and I are going to the park. Tu ed io andiamo al parco. So in this case, because io is not the first word in the sentence, it is not capitalized. Okay? And you may have noticed that I used a D here, if you're familiar with Italian at all. So I'll just explain real quick here. The letter D may be added to e, meaning and, okay, or a in Italian, becoming ed when the next word starts with a vowel in order to help separate the two words, especially when speaking. This also applies to a, meaning at or to, becoming ad. So the reason that they do it is because if you don't put the D in here, you'd say tu e io andiamo al parco, and it just becomes a little bit of a mouthful. So it's not required that you add the D, but it is very helpful, and I think it's very useful, especially when you're speaking. But it still means the same thing. It still means and. Okay. All right. Lei and loro are usually capitalized when written since they signify formal pronouns. However, lei and loro are not capitalized because they mean she and they respectively. Okay, so if it is not capitalized, it'll mean lei means she and loro means they. Okay, if it is capitalized, it means that it's the formal tense. Okay, so lei means she, but lei capitalized means you in the formal singular. Likewise, loro means they, but loro capitalized means you in the formal plural. But like we just said in the last slide, is that you're not generally going to be using this unless you're dealing with a lot of formal language. Okay, so it shouldn't be that confusing. Unlike in English, in Italian, subject pronouns are generally not necessary. This is because once the verb is conjugated, its ending usually tells us who's doing the action. For example, parlo alla ragazza is I talk to the girl. Okay, you can tell because parlo ends in an O. We'll discuss that a little bit further in the next module. Okay, and just another example, parli alla ragazza is you talk to the girl. You could tell because of the ending. But in this case, lui parla alla ragazza, he talks to the girl. You would probably want to leave the lui in here because this can mean he or she or you informal. Okay, so in that instance, you'd probably want to leave the subject pronoun in just for clarification. All right, we have some more helpful tips continued here. So the subject pronoun is retained for clarity or emphasis. However, it is not usually necessary since context will usually help you determine who the subject is. Okay, so another example, we would leave it in for clarity because as we just talked about in the last example, if you're saying she talks to the girl, lei parla alla ragazza, or he talks to the girl, lui parla alla ragazza. If you leave out the pronouns, it's the exact same sentence. Okay, so parla alla ragazza, parla alla ragazza. So in this case, you probably want to leave them in just for clarity. And then for emphasis, I'm going out. What are you doing? Io esco. Tu che fai? Okay, so we're emphasizing the I and you in this case. So in this case, you would leave them in. Lei can mean she or you in the formal singular. You can only tell which is which based on context or if it is capitalized when written. Okay, so she talks to the girl. Lei parla alla ragazza. You, formal, talk to the girl. Lei parla alla ragazza. Okay, do you see any difference? No, you shouldn't because there is no difference. Okay, and then we have how is she? Come sta lei? Or how are you? Come sta lei? So you can tell the difference when it's written out because it's usually capitalized. But if you're just speaking, you have to rely on context. Okay, so you'd have to kind of know if they're talking to you or if they're talking about a girl. Okay, and you can generally move subject pronouns around and they'll still be correct. So that's a little bit different from English. So in this case, how are you? In the informal, you would say come stai tu? Or you can say tu come stai? Or you could say come stai and just take out the two altogether. They all mean the same thing. Another example, he is going out at 7. Esce lui alle 7. You can also say lui esce alle 7. Or alle 7 lui esce. And finally, esce alle 7. And you just can take out the lui altogether. Okay, so all of these are correct, and you see how you can put it there, or there, or there, or you can leave it out. And so it's a lot more flexible than in English. So it makes it a little bit more confusing for beginners, but once you learn it, it becomes easier because you don't have to worry so much about getting the word order correct. Okay, how to use subject pronouns in a sentence. So in English, we in this example, I have them all listed out first. Okay, so the subject pronoun is in red. So in a sentence, you'd have I, you, he, she, you, we, you all, and they at the beginning of the sentences. So in Italian, like we know, you don't have to put them at the beginning, but in this case, I've put them at the beginning just to keep it simple. And I've also put them in parentheses in parentheses so that you know that you don't necessarily need it, unless, of course, you want it for emphasis or clarity, as we discussed earlier. So in this case, the verb I use to be. So in Italian, the verb is essere, to be. So io sono is I am, io sono. Tu sei, lui è, lei è, lei è. Okay, again, these are the same, but one means she and one means you, formal. Noi siamo, voi siete, and loro sono. Okay, so these are your this is a very basic sentence, but it is a complete sentence. So if you want to say I am, io sono, and that can be your first sentence in Italian. Okay, let's move on to the next module, which will be verbs. Okay, we're on to quiz module 2.1, subject pronouns. There's only 5 questions in this quiz, so I'll go ahead and read each question and the possible answers, and I'll pause for a few moments to let you try and decide on which is the correct answer. But if you need more time, just go ahead and pause the video. All right, let's get started. Number 1, what is a pronoun? Choose only one best answer. A word that describes an action. B, a word that modifies a verb or adverb. Or C, a word that takes the place of a noun or phrase. Okay, letter C is the correct answer. A pronoun, or pronome, is a word that takes the place of a noun or phrase. Number 2, what part of the sentence does a subject pronoun replace? Choose only one best answer. A, the noun or proper noun. B, the verb. Or C, the adjective or adverb. Okay, letter A is the correct answer. A subject pronoun, or un pronome personale soggetto, is the who part of a sentence, the person or thing, noun, doing the action. They're usually used in place of a name or object in order to reduce redundancy. For example, if you wanted to say, Mary ran home, then Mary played outside, Mary had fun, you could use a subject pronoun in place of Mary by saying Mary ran outside, then she played outside, she had fun. Okay, number 3. Subject pronouns are often omitted in Italian because they're not needed. In which of the following instances would you want to keep the subject pronoun in a sentence? Choose all answers that apply. A, clarity. For example, to distinguish between lui, lei, and lei, formal, when the verb is in the third person singular. B, emphasis. For example, This is what he thinks, but what do you think? Or C, to keep redundancy. For example, we are going out, then we are coming home. We will be hungry, so we will eat dinner. Okay, so letters A and B are correct. C is incorrect because we don't want to create redundancy. We want to reduce redundancy. So the subject pronoun is retained for clarity or emphasis. For example, lei can mean she or you in the formal singular. You can only tell which is which based on context or if it is capitalized when written. Okay, number 4. Paying attention to capitalization rules. Which of the following is written correctly to mean she goes to school, I stay home, and you, formal singular, go to work? Choose only one best answer. Okay, so these are all the exact same sentence, just with different words capitalized. So the sentence reads, A. Lei va a scuola. Io sto a casa e lei va al lavoro. Okay, in letter A, the first lei is capitalized, io is capitalized, and the second lei is also capitalized. B, none of the subject pronouns are capitalized. And in letter C, the first lei is capitalized, io is not, and the second lei is capitalized. Okay, so letter C is the correct answer, with the first lei being capitalized, the eo is not, and the second lei is capitalized because it means you formal. Although I is always capitalized in English, io is not capitalized in Italian unless it's the first word of a sentence. Lei and loro, when used in the formal sense, are always capitalized when written since they signify formal pronouns. However, lei and loro, in the informal sense, are not capitalized unless starting a sentence because they mean she and they, respectively. The first word of a sentence is always capitalized, just as in English. Okay, and number 5. Which of the following are acceptable ways of saying, how are you, in the informal to form or second person singular? Choose all answers that apply. A. Come stai tu? B. Tu come stai? C. Come stai? Or D. Noi come stai? Okay, so letters A, B, and C are correct. D is not correct because noi means we. Okay, so you can generally move subject pronouns around or omit completely unless used for clarity or emphasis. In this case, to is the only correct pronoun to use for the second person singular, informal to tense, because noi means we. Okay, so how did you do? If there's any that you didn't get correct the first time around, you can either go back and replay the video, or you can reread the answers here. And I will just quickly scroll down, and you can always pause the video if you want to reread one of the answers here. All right, great job. Verbs or verbi. So verbs are probably the most frustrating yet helpful element of Italian grammar. Okay, so if you're already familiar with Italian, you're probably familiar with conjugating and all the different irregular verbs out there. So we're just gonna walk through bit by bit here and just get you familiar with verbs, okay? They can be a bit overwhelming, but just take it one step at a time, and we'll try not to get too overwhelmed by it, okay? So we are on to verbi. We're on the second rung already, okay? So verbs. What is a verb? A verb, or un verbo, is basically the action part of a sentence. Okay, so for example, I run home. Okay, the verb would be run. You have a book. The verb would be have. And he is a boy. The verb would be is. How many types of verbs are there in Italian? So there are three main types of verbs. These are based on their endings in the infinitive form. So we have ARE verbs, ERE verbs, and IRE verbs. For example, an ARE verb would be andare, to go. Andare. You could see the ARE here ending. An ERE would be essere, to be. Essere, ERE. And IRE, dormire, to sleep. Dormire. And there's the IRE there on the ending. Okay, just to note, verbs can be either regular, meaning they all follow the same conjugation pattern, or irregular. Infinitives. What is an infinitive? So the infinitive, l'infinito, is the basic form of a verb before it's been conjugated or modified to match the subject and verb tense. In English, it's the to form of a verb. In Italian, it's the ARE, ERE, and IRE form. For example, parlare, to speak. Okay, you see how the ARE, it's got the ARE ending, and in English, it's to speak. Avere is to have, and finire, to finish. When you use the infinitive form, you use the infinitive form when you want to say to do something. Okay, so to do something. For example, I want to play. Voglio giocare. So I want, voglio, to play. Giocare. So in this case, you leave on the ARE ending and you don't conjugate it. In this example, voglio, has been conjugated from the irregular verb volere, and giocare remains in its infinitive form. So I don't have to conjugate every verb then? Nope. In general, you conjugate the first verb in a series, then leave the immediately following verbs in their infinitive form, which is way easier. Okay, so again, back to this example. Voglio giocare, you conjugate the first verb, volere, and you don't conjugate giocare if you want to leave it with the to form, in the to form. How to conjugate verbs. So what does it mean to conjugate a verb? Conjugating, or coniugare, a verb means to take the infinitive form and change it to match the subject doing the action and the verb tense being used. Do we conjugate in English? That's a good question. Yes, we do, but not nearly to the same extent as in the Romance languages, such as in Italian, Spanish, and French. So for example, to speak in the present tense in English, you really only change the third person singular here. So I speak, you speak, he or she speaks, we speak, they speak. Okay, so we don't conjugate as much as we do in the Romance languages, because in Italian, okay, for the same word, you would use parlare in the present tense. Okay, io parlo, tu parli, lui, lei parla, noi parliamo, and loro parlano. Okay, so you see how the ending is different on every single one of these verbs? That's what we mean by conjugating. And this is just the present tense, for example. Do all verbs follow the same pattern for each tense? Regular verbs follow the same pattern. All the endings are the same. But irregular verbs need to be memorized, although many do follow the similar patterns. Verbs in a series. How do I use 2 or more verbs in a row? Well, for example, if you want to say, I want to play, in English, you'd say, I want, and then you add to play. Voglio giocare. So, voglio giocare, you add the 2 verbs together, but like we just talked about, voglio is conjugated and giocare remains in the infinitive form. So in this case, we have conjugated and infinitive. So voglio, I want, the first verb is conjugated from volere to the io form. And giocare, to play, is left as an infinitive. So if you want to have more than 2 verbs in a row, in this example, I want to learn to speak Italian. Voglio imparare a parlare italiano. So just to note, some infinitives like imparare always take the preposition a, di, or da, but don't worry about that right now. Okay, that's why we just added it on here, imparare a. So in this example, we have I want plus to learn plus to speak Italian. Voglio is conjugated. Imparare a is to learn. Parlare, to speak Italiano. Conjugated, infinitive, infinitive. Pretty simple, right? It makes it a little bit easier when you use more than one verb in a row in this case, because you don't have to worry about conjugating the following verbs. Okay, so it's easy to say things like that, to make a sentence longer by adding to do something, to do that, to do this, and just leave it in the infinitive form. Verb tenses. What is a verb tense? So verb tenses are the conjugated forms of a verb. They determine the time in which an action takes place. For example, in the present tense, I walk to the store. In the future tense, I will walk to the store. And in the past tense, I walked to the store. How many verb tenses are there? There are basically 8 simple tenses and 8 compound tenses in Italian, but you really only need about 5 to get started. Okay, so it may feel overwhelming that there's so many, but just stick to the basics for now, and you can always add more tenses as you progress. So what's the difference between a simple and a compound tense? Simple tenses only require one verb. For example, I go home, vado a casa. A compound tense requires 2 verbs, usually an auxiliary verb, meaning avere or essere, plus a participle or un participio. So, for example, I did come home late. Sono venuto a casa tardi. I have eaten already. Ho mangiato di già. Okay, so as you can see in both of these instances, we added the verb essere, we conjugated to sono for the first person singular, so I. Sono venuto. So in this case, venuto is a past participle of venire, which is to come. So as you can see, we put 2 verbs together. Or I have eaten already. So o avere. O is a conjugated form of avere in the first person singular. And then mangiato would be the past participle of mangiare. So as you can see, it's a compound because you're putting 2 verbs together. Okay, so we have the 16 basic verb tenses. what are the 8 simple verb tenses? So the simple verb tenses are as follows. We have the present, il presente dell'indicativo, the simple future, il futuro semplice, the imperfect, l'imperfetto dell'indicativo, the conditional, il condizionale, the imperative or commands, l'imperativo, the subjunctive, il presente del congiuntivo, the imperfect subjunctive, l'imperfetto del congiuntivo, and finally the past remote or il passato remoto. What are the 8 compound tenses? Okay, so the compound tenses are as follows. We have the progressive forms, which are multiple tenses formed with stare and a gerund. Those are the words that end in ing in English. The simple past, il passato prossimo, which is called simple, but it's actually compound, so go figure. The conditional perfect, il condizionale passato. The future perfect, il futuro anteriore. The pluperfect indicative, il trapassato prossimo. The past subjunctive, il congiuntivo passato. The pluperfect subjunctive, il trapassato congiuntivo. And finally, the pluperfect, or the il trapassato remoto. Okay, so obviously you don't have to learn all of those at the beginning. In fact, you probably don't ever have to learn all of those unless you're going into interpreting or into a professional field. But at the beginning, I would recommend, in what order would you recommend learning these verb tenses? So here's what I think. I think that you should start with the first few. Okay, so in this order is my recommendation, starting with the present, and then go to the simple past, which is a compound tense, and then the simple future, the imperfect, and then the conditional. And then if you want to throw in the imperative and commands, I think those are pretty much going to get you to, it's going to get you through most of what you want to express, at least at the beginning. Okay, so do I really need to learn all these right now? No, you certainly don't. But I wanted to give you the big picture. Okay, start with the first 3, then add the next 2 or 3, and then progress down the list depending on your goals. Okay, so when I was tutoring a young man, and we'd already gone through about 7 different tenses, verb tenses, and he finally said, how many tenses are there? So I realized that he didn't have the big picture, and I wanted to give you that big picture so that you know how far you are in terms of how many verb tenses you've already learned, and so that you don't feel like it's never ending. Okay, there is a finite amount of verb tenses, so just take it one at a time and start with the present. Then I would say the simple past, simple future, and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay, regular verbs in the present tense. When do you use the present tense? The present tense is used to describe something occurring now or in the near future. So for example, mangiare in the present tense can mean I eat. So io mangio can mean I eat, I do eat, I am eating, or I will eat soon. So it's kind of, in this sense, it's much easier than English, because you see how there's 4 different ways of saying the exact same thing in English as one phrase in Italian. So this replaces all 4 of these. How do you conjugate the present tense? Okay, so we have, as we talked about in the subject pronoun section, we have first person, second person, and third person, singular and plural. Okay, so for an ARE verb, so we have ARE, ERE, and IRE verbs, And then for the IRE, we have 2, or some may say 3 different conjugations for the IRE verbs. So the basic endings in the present tense for a regular verb, regular ARE verb would be o, I, a, iamo, ate, ano. Okay, you can, as I always did, just make a little song out of it. So o, I, a, iamo, ate, ano. For example, parlare, to speak. So io parlo, tu parli, lei or lui parla, noi parliamo, voi parlate, and loro parlano. Now, if you have an ARE verb that is preceded by a C, okay, you need to add an H in here and here to retain the hard C sound. Okay, otherwise this will change to a soft C. So for instance, it turns into cercare is to look for or to search for. So we have cerco, cerchi, cerca, cerchiamo, cercate, cercano. Now, if we don't have the H in here, instead of being cerchi, this would be cerci. And instead of cerchiamo, it would be cerciamo. So that is why we have to put the H in here to retain the hard C sound that you have with a C-ARE verb. Okay, likewise, pagare, to pay. So the same thing with the G, you need to add the H in there to retain the hard G sound that you get from a G-ARE verb. So pago, paghi, paga, paghiamo, pagate, pagano. Okay, so again, we added the H in here in the second person singular and the first person plural. Okay, an ERE verb. The endings would be o, I, e, iamo, ette, ono. Okay, so do you see any difference here? The difference is in the third person. The third person singular, the second person plural, and the third person plural. Okay, so those are the only ones that are different. The o, I, and iamo stay the same, no matter if it's an ARE or ERE verb. So for example, we have vedere, which is to see. Vedo, vedi, vede, vediamo, vedete, vedono. In an IRE verb, now where do you see the differences? That's right. The only difference is in the ite. Ette, ite. Okay? Everything else is the same between the ERE and the IRE verbs. So that means that for all 3 of these, the o, I, and iamo are the same. So the only difference is these guys here. And between these 2, the only difference is this one. Okay? So we have dormire is our regular IRE verb. Dormo, dormi, dorme, dormiamo, dormite, dormono. And now we also have a second conjugation of the IRE verbs, which instead of ending in these regular endings here, we change them to isco, ishi, isce, iamo, ite, iscono. Okay, so they probably sound kind of different to you, but these 2 remain the same. Okay, so the iamo and ite are the same here between the both different conjugations of the IRE verbs. Okay, but then we got the isco, ishi, isce, and then the iscono are different. For our example, we have capire, which is to understand or to know. So we have capisco, capisci, capisce, capiamo, capite, capiscono. Okay, so Notice that the sound is soft here, capisci, capisce, and it's hard, capisco and capiscono here and here. Just something to be aware of. Okay, irregular verbs in the present tense. Do all verbs follow the same pattern? No, there are many irregular verbs, verbi irregolari, that you'll just have to memorize. So below are just a few of the most common ones. Essere, to be. Avere, to have. Fare, to do or to make. Volere, to want. Dare, to give. Stare, to be. Bere, to drink. Andare, to go. Dovere, to have to or must. And potere, to be able to or can. How do you conjugate these in the present tense? Okay, so just like we had in the previous one, in the previous slide, we have, okay, essere. So again, you're just going to have to memorize these. So I'm just going to go over them all once, and then you'll have to study this on your own, and just try and just keep going over them over and over and over and over and over again until you remember them. And the more you use it, the more you will get used to what they sound like and what they should be. And just practice makes perfect, I guess. Oops, excuse me. Okay, so we have sono, sei, e, siamo, siete, sono. Okay, sono, sei, e, siamo, siete, sono. Avere, o, hai, a, abbiamo, avete, hanno. Okay, notice that the H is silent, but we retain it so that you know that it's the conjugated form of avere. O, hai, a, abbiamo, avete, hanno. Fare. Faccio, fai, fa, facciamo, fate, fanno. Volere. Voglio, vuoi, vuole, vogliamo, volete, vogliono. Okay, remember we got that GLI sound in there? Okay, so it's not voglio, it's voglio. Okay, voglio, vuoi, vuole, vogliamo, volete, vogliono. Dare, to give. Okay, do, dai, da, diamo, date, danno. Notice there's an accent on da. That's to distinguish between this and from. Okay, so da also means from without the accent mark. So with the accent, it means third person singular of dare. So do, dai, da, diamo, date, danno. Stare. Sto, stai, sta, stiamo, state, stanno. Bere. Bevo, bevi, beve. Beviamo, bevete, bevono. Okay, this is very different, very, very irregular. Okay. Andare. Vado, vai, va. Andiamo, andate, vanno. Okay. Dovere. Devo, devi, deve. Dobbiamo, dovete, devono. Okay, this one is very similar to bere, just because you got the same endings here. Devo, devi, deve. Okay, bevo, bevi, beve. This one's a little bit different. Dobbiamo from beviamo. But then these are the same. So dovete, bevete, devono, bevono. Okay, and then finally we have potere. So posso, puoi, può, possiamo, potete, possono. Again, we have an accent mark here on the può. Yeah, and these are pretty different as well. So you just have to memorize those. Okay, great job. And just go over these as many times as you can, and make a little song out of it so that you can remember it in your head, and you'll get it eventually. Okay, reflexive verbs. What are reflexive verbs? Reflexive verbs, or I verbi riflessivi, are verbs whose subject and object are the same. Therefore, the action is reflected back to the person or thing performing the action. How are reflexive verbs used? They are generally used when referring to actions that you perform on yourself, like dressing yourself, or reciprocal actions, like hugging each other, and they're always accompanied by a reflexive pronoun. Okay, so what are reflexive pronouns? A reflexive pronoun, or un pronome riflessivo, is a pronoun that is used with reflexive verbs to show that the action is directed back at the subject. In English, the reflexive pronoun is often implied rather than stated, such as in I get dressed rather than saying I dress myself, or we hug rather than saying we hug each other. But it's usually expressed in Italian. Okay, so that's a little bit different between English and Italian. They are as follows. Okay, so we have our singular and plural pronouns. So in the first person singular, we have me to mean myself, and we have chi to mean ourselves. Okay, and in second person, we have ti to mean yourself, and vi to mean yourselves in the plural. And finally, in the third person, we have si to mean himself, herself, or yourself. And if you'll notice, it's also si in the plural, okay, to mean themselves. So reflexive pronouns follow the same placement patterns as direct object pronouns, which we'll cover later in the course. Okay, so I just want to get you a little bit familiar with it in this module here in the verbs area, so that once we start talking about how to use direct object pronouns, then you'll know a little bit more about how to use these as well. But these are the ones that you use with reflexive verbs. Okay. So, for example, if you say, I call myself, in Italian, you say, I call myself, but you really are saying, my name is in English. Okay, so you'd say, mi chiamo, and then your name. Okay, so I would say, mi chiamo Laura, or I call myself Laura. Okay, you wash yourself, and then you dress yourself, would be ti lavi, poi ti vesti. Okay, so in this case, we're using the reflexive verb lavarsi and the reflexive verb vestirsi. Okay, so in this case, we put ti before the conjugated verb. Okay, so ti lavi. Okay, these are both the second person singular. And then I also have the verb vestirsi. So we have poi, then ti vesti. Okay, so again, it goes before the conjugated verb in the second person singular in this case. Okay, and you can tell that these are reflexive verbs because they end in si, okay, or si. Okay, and then we have she wakes herself up at 8 o'clock, or in Italian, lei si sveglia alle 8. Okay, so in this case, we're using the reflexive verb svegliarsi. Again, you can tell it's a reflexive verb because it ends in si. Okay, and here we put the si, okay, because it's third person singular, saying she, before the conjugated verb. Okay, so lei si sveglia alle 8. Okay, and then finally, we hug each other tightly. Ci abbracciamo forte. Okay, so in this case, we're using the first person plural. Okay, ci, and then we have our abbracciamo, okay, which comes after the ci because it's conjugated, forte. Okay, so there's a quick introduction to reflexive verbs. If they're still a little bit confusing, don't worry. I just wanted to introduce them to you, and they'll get easier to use as you practice. The impersonal si. What is the impersonal si? So the impersonal si is simply a way to express an action, a way of thinking or behaving that is generalized, recommended, or suggested. Okay, now you're probably wondering what that means. So I'm just going to explain it a little bit here. So how and when is it used? It is often used when giving directions or in a cooking recipe to mean one or oneself. It is used with the third person singular or plural conjugation of the verb in accordance with the direct object. Okay, so can it be used with reflexive verbs? Good question. Yes. However, in order to avoid a double CC, you need to change the first C to a chi. For example, if you want to say one gets up early when one has children, you would, rather than saying si sveglia, you would say ci si sveglia presto quando si hanno bambini. Okay, so we just don't want to have that double CC because it sounds kind of silly, but so we have to change the first one to a chi. Okay, now let's give you some examples here. So how does one say any word that you're wondering how to say in Italian? Okay, so how does one say ciao or hello in Italian? Come si dice hello in Italian, for example? Okay, so come si dice is how does one say? So this is one good example of how to use the impersonal si because we're saying how does one say? And then whatever word it is that you want to know how to say in Italian. How would one get to the train station from here? Come si va alla stazione di treno da qui? Okay, so again, we have the si, va. Okay, so this is the third person singular, va, and then we're just using the impersonal si, just placed directly before the conjugated verb. One can't enter the building without permission. Non si può entrare nell'edificio senza permesso. Okay, so in this case, we're saying one cannot enter, okay, in the building. So we're using, again, the third person singular, and we put it right before the conjugated verb. Okay, so in this case, we do have two verbs together. So if you recall, we don't conjugate the second verb because we're saying one can't enter the building. Okay, so non si può entrare. One eats lots of spaghetti when in Italy. Okay, so si mangiano tanti spaghetti quando si è in Italia. Okay, so this example, I have two different forms of the verb here. So in this first instance, okay, we're using si mangiano. And if you notice, this is the third person plural conjugation of mangiare. Okay, and you're wondering, why are you using the plural form? Well, it's because if you look back up here, it says in accordance with the direct object. So in this case, the direct object is spaghetti, okay, tanti spaghetti, which is plural. So you have to use a plural verb here, okay? So si mangiano tanti spaghetti. But then here we use the singular again, okay? Just like all these other examples. We're using the third person singular, okay? So si è when one is in Italia, okay? Because it's singular here. Okay, I know it's probably a little bit confusing, but you know, once again, it just takes some practice and some getting used to. And again, if you have any questions, just post them in the community chat. Okay, and we have one more example. So where can one find the bathroom? Dove si trova il bagno? A very important question when traveling. Okay, so again, we have singular. It's a singular verb here. Dove si trova il bagno? Okay, because il bagno is the direct object and it is singular. Okay, so dove si trova il bagno? Okay, there you have it. Hopefully it's a little bit clearer than before. But again, if it's not super clear, don't worry about it, okay? How to use verbs in a sentence. Okay, so we have, let's see here, our very, very simple sentences here. So I am, you are, he is, she is, you, formal are, we are, you all are, and they are. Okay, so as we looked at before, the subject goes first, okay, in English, and then the verb comes after. Okay, and we're using the verb to be in this case. So in Italian, we have the same thing, il soggetto and il verbo. We're using essere. So io sono, okay, I am, io sono. Tu sei, lui è, lei è, lei è. Okay, remember this is the you formal. Noi siamo, voi siete, and loro sono. Okay, so as you can see, these are pretty much exactly the same. The only difference would be that in Italian, you don't need the subject pronouns unless you need it for clarification or emphasis. Whereas in English, we need them. You always pretty much need them. Okay, and then we have another example here. So we have the verb to have. Okay, I have, you have, he has, she has, you have, we have, they, you have, and they have. Okay, so the only one that's different here is right here, he and she has. Okay, and then in Italian, okay, we have io ho, tu hai, lui ha, lei ha, lei ha, noi abbiamo, voi avete, and loro hanno. Okay, so once again, we have our subject pronoun here and then our verb after. Okay, so simple, very, very simple way to use a verb in a sentence. Okay, so now we have our first 50 verbs to learn. Okay, so I'm going to say each verb twice, and I want you to repeat after me each time. Okay, so I'll leave a little, I'll say the verb, and then I'll leave a little pause, and then I'll say it again and leave a pause. Okay, and then say the English. So just follow along with me and practice your pronunciation. Okay. Oh, and then I just want to tell you here that if the verbs are starred, okay, it means it's an irregular verb. And also, these may be regular in the present tense, okay, but I still put a little star by it in case it's irregular in, say, the past participle, which is the case for a lot of these, or in maybe another tense, okay, but just because if you look it up, it'll it'll probably say that it's an irregular verb, okay? But again, it may still be regular in the present tense. So you just have to look them up and see how they're conjugated, okay, if it's marked as irregular. Okay, and then a double star means that it follows a slightly different spelling pattern than all the regular verbs. And then this just means it's the second conjugation of an IRE verb. Okay, so that's like with conosco, conosci, conosce, things like that. Okay, the isco, ishi, ishe forms. All right, let's get started. Okay, accendere, accendere, to turn on the lights. Amare, amare, to love. Andare, andare, to go. Aprire, aprire, to open. Avere, avere, to have. Bere, bere, to drink. Camminare, camminare, to walk. capire, capire, to understand. Chiamare, chiamare, to call. Comprare, comprare, to buy. Conoscere, conoscere, means to know, meaning to be familiar with, as opposed to sapere, which means to know, like the information. Okay. Cucinare, cucinare, to cook. Dare, dare, to give. Dire, dire, to say or to tell. Dormire, dormire, to sleep. Dovere, dovere, to have to or to must do something. Entrare, entrare, to enter. Essere, essere, to be. Fare, fare, to do or to make. Finire, finire, okay, to finish, okay. Girare, girare, to turn. Guardare, guardare, to look at or watch. Lavare, lavare, to wash. Lavorare, lavorare, to work. Okay, notice these are very similar, okay, but they are very different. Leggere, leggere, to read. Okay, and then we have mangiare. Mangiare, to eat. It's an important one. Mettersi, mettersi, to put on oneself or to wear. It's a reflexive verb. Parlare, parlare, to speak or talk. Partire, partire, to leave. Pensare, pensare, to think. Piacere, piacere, to be pleasing to someone, usually. Potere, potere, to be able to or can. Prendere, prendere, to take or get. Pulire, pulire, to clean. Rispondere, rispondere, to respond or reply. Salire, salire, to climb up. Sapere, sapere, to know. Scrivere, scrivere, to write. Sentire, sentire, to hear or to feel. Sorridere, sorridere, to smile. Stare, stare, to be or to stay. Studiare. Studiare. Okay, to study. Succedere. Succedere. To happen or occur. Tenere. Tenere. To hold. Tornare. Tornare. To return or go back. Uscire. Uscire. To exit. Vedere. Vedere is to see. Venire. Venire. To come. Vivere. Vivere is to live. And volere. Volere is to want. Okay, and there you have it, your first 50 verbs to learn. Okay, so just be sure to go over this a few times and become familiar with these verbs, and it'll help you get started on being able to use a lot of these in conversation. Okay, so these a lot of these are pretty helpful common verbs. Okay, we're on to quiz module 2.2 verbs. There are only 5 questions, so I will go ahead and read each question aloud and the possible answers, and I'll pause for a few moments to give you a chance to try and figure out the right answer before I give you the correct answer. If you need more time, just go ahead and pause the video. All right, let's get started. Number 1. Which of the following are the basic verb endings in Italian? Choose all answers that apply. A. Are, B. Ere, C. Ire, D. Ore, or E. Ure. Okay, so letters A, B, and C are the correct answer. There are 3 main types of verbs. These are based on their endings in the infinitive form, are, ere, and ire. Number 2, which of the following verbs have already been conjugated? Choose all answers that apply. A. Parlare, B. Vedere, C. Dormo, D. Mangiare, or E. Cerchiamo. Okay, so the correct answers were C and E. If the verb ends in are, ere, or ire, then it's in its infinitive form. Otherwise, it has already been conjugated to correspond to who or what is performing the action. In this case, dormo and cerchiamo. Number 3, which of the following is an irregular verb? Choose all answers that apply. A. Essere, to be. B. Avere, to have. C. Fare, to do or make. D. Andare, to go. Or E. Volere, to want. Okay, so in this case, all of them are the correct answer. So all of these are considered irregular verbs because they do not follow the regular conjugation patterns, although some are very close. These are very common and will just need to be memorized. Some other irregular verbs include dare, stare, dovere, potere, and bere. Number 4. Please choose the correct way to say, I want to learn how to cook. As a hint, I'll give you the verbs. So, volere means to want, imparare a, to learn or to learn how, and cucinare means to cook. Choose only one best answer. Okay, so A, volere imparo a cucinare. B, voglio imparo a cucino. C, voglio imparare a cucino. Or D, voglio imparare a cucinare. Okay, so letter D was the correct answer. Whenever you have two or more verbs in a row, you only need to conjugate the first verb. Just like in English, you'd conjugate the first verb and leave the following verb or verbs in their infinitive or to form. For example, I want, conjugated in the first person singular, plus to learn how in the infinitive, plus to cook in the infinitive. Okay, so in Italian, voglio, which is conjugated in the first person singular, plus imparare a in the infinitive, plus cucinare in the infinitive. Note, imparare is usually directly followed by the preposition a when saying to learn how to do something. And number 5, which of the following statements is incorrect? Choose only one best answer. A, we use the impersonal si when we want to express an action, way of thinking, or behaving that is generalized, recommended, or suggested. B, reflexive verbs are verbs whose subject and object are the same. Therefore, the action is reflected back to the person or thing performing the action. They're always accompanied by a reflexive pronoun. Or C, infinitives are the verb forms that have already been conjugated to correspond to the person or thing performing the action. Okay, so letter C was the incorrect answer. So an infinitive, or l'infinito, is the basic form of a verb before it's been conjugated. In English, it's the to form of a verb. In Italian, it's the ere, ere, or ire form. All right, so how did you do? If there are any that you had any trouble with, or if you want to go back and retake the quiz, just feel free to rewatch this video. Otherwise, you can just reread the answers here. And I'll just scroll through these quickly, and you can pause the video if you want to reread any of them. All right, great job. Okay, articles or articoli, which means we are on the third rung of our pyramid. So we're making some progress. This is good. Okay, articles. What is an article? Un articolo is the tiny word that comes before a noun, such as the and a or an in English. For example, I have the book, you have a book, and this is an apple. Okay, so these are the articles right here. Here's a definite article, an indefinite, and an indefinite article. How many types of articles are there? There are two main types of articles, definite and indefinite. How many articles are there in Italian? In English, we only have one definite article, the, and two indefinite articles, a and an. But in Italian, we have several of each type because it has to agree with the noun it's referring to. So there's only three in English, but there's actually 11 articles in Italian. Okay. So we're gonna head on into it and figure out when to use each type of article. Singular definite articles. What are definite articles? In Italian, the definite articles, meaning it's referring to a specific object or objects, can be singular or plural. What are the singular definite articles? The singular definite articles are as follows. Okay, so for a masculine singular noun, we'd use il. For feminine singular nouns, we use la. Feminine and masculine singular nouns starting with a vowel take the L apostrophe. Okay, an L apostrophe, and then the word that starts with a vowel. Masculine singular nouns starting with S plus a consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, and X all take lo as the definite article. Okay, now these aren't super common, so this is probably going to be the one that you use the least. So don't try not to get too overwhelmed by having to memorize all of these. Okay, it's mostly the words that are hard to pronounce with one of the other articles. They put a lo there. Okay, it'll make a little bit more sense as I move forward. Okay, so for example, c'è il treno. There's the train. Okay, so we use il because treno is a masculine singular noun. C'è la macchina. There's the car. Okay, we're using la because macchina is a feminine singular noun. C'è l'uomo or c'è l'enoteca. There's the man or the wine shop. Okay, so here we have an L plus apostrophe, okay, like that, because the noun is starting with a vowel. Okay, so L apostrophe and then uomo, L apostrophe enoteca. And then finally we have c'è lo studio and c'è lo zaino. There's the studio and there's the backpack. Okay, so these are two of these examples up here. Okay, so like I said, they aren't as common as these other types of nouns. So for these, you'd use lo studio, lo zaino. Okay, plural definite articles. What are the plural definite articles? The plural definite articles are as follows. So for masculine plural nouns, il becomes I. Okay, il becomes I, or the letter I. For feminine plural nouns, la becomes le. Okay, la becomes le. Masculine plural nouns starting with S plus consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, or X, the lo becomes li. Okay, lo becomes li. So here are examples. Ci sono I treni. There are the trains. Okay, we're using I, or the letter I, in English, because treni is a masculine plural noun. Okay, I treni. Ci sono le macchine. Okay, now in the previous slide we had macchina, so this becomes plural. So a plural feminine noun takes le. Okay, and you can also see that the endings here match up. So I treni, le macchine. There are the cars. Ci sono gli studi and gli zaini. There are the studios or the backpacks. Okay, so again, the lo changes into li when they become plural. Okay, so gli studi, gli zaini. And remember, just a note here, c'è, there is, becomes ci sono, there are, when the following noun is plural. Okay, so that's why we used c'è on the previous slide, and now we have ci sono, there are. How many forms of definite articles are there? There are 4 singular forms and 3 plural forms, which make up 7 in total. When to use definite articles. So when do you need to use a definite article in Italian? Okay, so there are many exceptions, but here are some general guidelines to follow. So, needless to say, you're going to use an article more often than you're not going to use a definite article. Okay, so these are just some of the example or some of the circumstances that you would use a definite article. I'll just go over them real quick. So when talking about a specific noun, when referring to a person with a title, when talking about clothes and parts of the body, when there is a reflexive verb used before the noun, with dates and times, when referring to general categories and abstract nouns like friendship, peace, or love, when referring to something previously talked about, with most possessive adjectives, there are some exceptions, with names of languages, with names of countries, continents, and regions, except after di, in, or with the verb andare, and with geographical features like lakes, rivers, large islands, volcanoes, and mountain ranges. Okay, so when in doubt, use a definite article. You're probably more likely to have to use it than to not use it. So, for example, questo è il cane di Giuseppe. This is Giuseppe's dog. So in this instance, we're talking about a specific noun, okay? Specific noun. Il signor Rossi è un avvocato. Mr. Rossi is a lawyer. So this one, we're using it because it's a person with a title. Ti fa male la schiena? Does your back hurt? Okay, we're using the definite article because we're talking about a body part. Gli piacciono le macchine. He likes cars. Okay, in this instance, we're talking about a general category of cars. And la camicia è fatta in Italia. The shirt was made in Italy. Okay, in this one, we're talking about clothing. So we'd use it. Okay, so like I said, if you're wondering if you're going to use it or not, just probably err on the side of using it. And if not, then, it's okay to, to make a mistake. Indefinite articles. What are the indefinite articles? So in Italian, the indefinite articles, meaning it's referring to an indefinite or unspecified object, are as follows. Okay, so for a masculine noun, we use un. For a feminine noun, we use una. For a feminine noun starting with a vowel, we use un plus an apostrophe. Okay, un plus an apostrophe. And for masculine nouns starting with an S plus consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, or X, we use uno. Okay, uno. That's kind of reminiscent of the definite article lo. Okay, it ends with an O. Okay, so for example, we have our same examples once more. C'è un treno. There is a train. C'è un treno because it is a masculine noun. It's a masculine singular noun because you don't use these with plural nouns. Okay, so it makes it a little bit easier. C'è una macchina. There's a car. Okay, once again, feminine noun. C'è un'enoteca. There's a wine shop. Okay, un plus apostrophe because enoteca starts with a vowel. And c'è uno studio or uno zaino. There's a studio or backpack. Okay, so we have uno, again ending with an O because it's starting with one of these strange little consonants here. Okay, studio and zaino. How many forms of indefinite articles are there? Well, there's 4 forms. When in doubt, stick with un and una, okay, un and una, as they are the most common forms. okay, because most of the nouns are going to be masculine or feminine rather than, all these guys here. So you should learn all 4 of them, obviously, but if you're in doubt, then just go with un or una, and you're more likely to be correct. Okay, partitive articles. What the heck is a partitive article? L'articolo partitivo is an article that is used to say some or any of something, i.e., an indefinite amount. It can be used in both plural and, it can be used with both plural and singular nouns. How is the partitive article formed? The partitive article is formed by adding d, d, to the definite article. It literally means of the. Okay, so I have a little chart here. So for the definite article, which we just covered, we have il, la, l apostrophe, lo, I, le, and li. When you're adding d plus these, it becomes del, della, del, dello, dei, delle, and degli. Are there any other words used to mean some? Okay, so you can use the indefinite adjectives alcune or alcuni to mean some, but this can only be used with countable plural nouns. Okay, for example, piatti, amici, forchette, sedie. There's many, many more, but these are just some examples here. Okay, or number 2, you can use the indefinite adjectives qualche, adjective qualche to mean some, but this can only be used with countable singular nouns. Okay, so instead of piatti, we have piatto, just one plate. Instead of amici, we have amico, one friend. Forchetta, one fork, and sedia, one chair. Okay, so it's countable singular nouns. Or number 3, you can use the phrase un po' di to mean a little bit of, but this can only be used with uncountable singular nouns such as milk, cheese, wine, and butter. Okay, latte, formaggio, vino e burro. So you're probably wondering, so what the heck does this all mean? Okay, so we'll give you some examples here to make it a little bit clearer. Okay, so on this side, we have our examples, D plus an article. Okay, so we're going to be using these guys here. And on this side, we're going to be using one of these other ways, okay, an alternative way. So for the first one, do you want some wine? Vuoi del vino? Okay, del vino. Or, because it's an uncountable noun, wine, you can say vuoi un po' di vino? Vuoi un po' di vino? Okay, so we're using number 3 here. I have some fruit. Ho della frutta. Or, because it's an uncountable noun, we could say ho un po' di frutta. Okay, just like up here, un po' di frutta. She buys some cookies. Lei compra dei biscotti. Okay, so we have dei, okay, which is, where is it? Up here. Okay, because biscotti is plural. Okay, masculine plural, biscotti, because it ends in an I there. So we could say dei, or because it's a countable plural noun, we can say lei compra alcuni biscotti, or we can use it in the singular to mean the exact same thing and say qualche biscotto. Okay, it just becomes singular here, but it means the exact same thing. Okay, so qualche, some, alcuni, some. The only difference is that in this case, we're using it as a plural noun, and in this case, we're using it as a singular noun. There are some chairs. Ci sono delle sedie. Okay, delle, because sedie is feminine plural. Or because it's a countable plural noun, we can say ci sono alcune sedie. Alcune sedie, okay? Or we can make it singular and say qualche sedia. Qualche sedia. We have some friends. Abbiamo degli amici. Okay, degli amici because it is masculine plural and it starts with a vowel. Okay, so we're using degli, okay? Or because it's a countable plural noun, we can say noi abbiamo alcuni amici by keeping it plural. Or we can use it in the singular and say qualche amico. Okay, qualche amico. Oops. Okay, clear as mud. Just study this a bit, and eventually will become clear. And if you're confused, just you can just stick with these guys up here. Once you get a hang of the which definite article to use with the noun, and by adding the D plus a definite article, okay, you can use these for now. And then once you become more comfortable with it, you can use one of these, okay, whichever one is most appropriate for the noun that you're talking about. How to use articles in a sentence. Okay, so in English, we have subject, verb, article, noun. For example, I am a boy. Okay, a would be the article. You buy the books, the being the article, and she has a friend. Okay, a being the article. In Italian, we have soggetto più verbo più articolo più sostantivo. Okay, so once again, io sono un ragazzo. Un is the article. Tu compri I libri. Okay, I is the article. And lei ha un'amica. Un being the article, okay, because amica starts with a vowel and it's feminine. Okay, we are done with articles. Okay, we're on to quiz number 4, module 2.3, articles. There's only 5 questions in this quiz, so I'll go ahead and read each question aloud and all the possible answers, and then I'll pause for a few moments to let you try and figure out the right answer before revealing what the right answer is. If you need more time, just go ahead and pause the video. All right, let's get started. Number 1. How many forms of definite articles, meaning the, are there in Italian? Choose only one best answer. A, 3, B, 4, or C, 7. Okay, the correct answer is 7. There are 7 forms of the definite article in Italian, 4 singular forms and 3 plural forms. They are as follows. Singular is il, la, elle apostrofo, and lo. The plural forms are I, lei, and li. Number 2. How many forms of indefinite articles, meaning a or an, are there in Italian? Choose only one best answer. A, 2, B, 3, or C, 4. Okay, the correct answer is C, 4. There are 4 forms of the indefinite article in Italian. There are 4 singular forms and no plural forms. They are as follows: un, una, un apostrofo, and uno. Number 3. Which of the following indefinite articles can be used with a masculine noun? Choose all answers that apply. A, un, B, una, C, un apostrofo, or D, uno. Okay, the correct answers are A, un, and D, uno. Only un and uno can be used with masculine nouns. Un is used for most masculine nouns, including those starting with a vowel. Uno is only used for masculine nouns starting with specific letter combinations, such as S and a consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, and X. Una is only for feminine nouns starting with a consonant, and un apostrofo is only for feminine nouns starting with a vowel. Okay, number 4. Which of the following definite articles can be used with a masculine noun? Choose all answers that apply. A, il, B, I, C, la, D, lei, E, lo, F, li, and G, le apostrofo. Okay, so the correct answers were A, B, E, F, and G. Okay, so the following 4 forms can only be used with masculine nouns: il and I, lo and li. The following 2 forms can only be used with feminine nouns: la and lei. The le apostrofo is used for both masculine and feminine singular nouns starting with a vowel. Okay, and just to recap here, we have il is used for most masculine singular nouns starting with a consonant. I is used for most masculine plural nouns starting with a consonant. Lo is only used for masculine singular nouns starting with specific letter combinations, such as S plus a consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, and X. Li is only used for masculine plural nouns starting with specific letter combinations such as S plus consonant, Z, GN, SC, PN, PS, and X. La is only for feminine singular nouns starting with a consonant. Le is only for feminine plural nouns starting with a consonant. And le apostrofo is only for both masculine and feminine singular nouns starting with a vowel. Okay, I know that's a lot to take in there. But you can go ahead and pause the video if you want to reread this, and I'll also have it at the end of the video. Okay, and number 5, which of the following can be used to say some? Choose all answers that apply. A, D plus the definite article, which would form del, della, del apostrofo, dello, dei, delle, and degli. B, alcune or alcuni. C, qualche. And D, un po' di. Okay, so all of these are correct. All of these can mean some, however, they're used with different types of nouns. D plus a definite article forms the partitive article. It can be used with plural or singular nouns. For example, del latte, della torta, degli spaghetti, dei amici. Alcune or alcuni is used with countable plural nouns. For example, piatti, amici, forchette, and sedie. Qualche is used with countable singular nouns. For example, piatto, amico, forchetta, sedia. And un po' di is used with uncountable singular nouns like milk, cheese, wine, and butter. For example, latte, formaggio, vino, and burro. Okay, how did you do? If there's any that you missed, you can go ahead and retake this quiz as many times as you need. Or if you're comfortable with your answers, you can just go ahead and reread the explanations here if you want to. I'm just going to quickly scroll over them, and you can just pause the video if you want to reread any of them. Okay, great job.